In the noisy courtroom of Atlanta, a black woman stood up after the whole world thought she would collapse. Danielle Carter was not only facing a broken marriage, but also the legacy of discrimination and the contempt society reserved for those deemed not good enough. When the past seemed ready to drown her, a stranger shielded her with two simple words: "My wife." But their love was no fairy tale. It was filled with lies, suspicion, and fierce inner battles. Danielle had to learn how to forgive without losing herself to live truthfully and be truly loved. And that journey transformed an ordinary woman into the queen of her life. The heavy wooden door of Fulton County Courthouse creaked softly as it swung open, revealing a long hallway lined with gray carpet, where hurried footsteps and the click of high heels striking the tiled floor blended into the chaotic sound of justice at work. Danielle Carter stood at the threshold, her hand gripping a worn leather briefcase, eyes fixed on the distant figure of the judge who had just delivered the final ruling. Mrs. Carter retains full ownership of the law firm, personal assets, and her honor. Her honor. The word rang out like a blade, both painful and sweet, piercing through her chest. In the air heavy with the smell of ink and paperwork, the word became a declaration, a verdict against Ethan Whitmore and his family, and a mirror for Danielle's life. After years of being diminished and despised, she finally stood tall on her feet. The courtroom was packed. The expensive suits of the Whitmores mingled with the darker-skinned faces of clerks and Danielle's fellow lawyers who had come to support her. The atmosphere was taut as a string, but across the aisle, Margaret Whitmore, silver-haired, flawlessly groomed, dressed in a navy Chanel dress, merely lifted a corner of her lips, her long fingers sliding across the screen of her iPhone, to call her personal attorney. Ethan stood beside his mother, tie loosened, his expression a mix of defeat and stubborn pride. Danielle drew a deep breath. She wanted to scream, to cry, but her deep black eyes remained steady. The red heels, her last birthday gift from Ethan, struck the marble floor, each step like a hammer blow pounding down the Whitmores' arrogance. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Atlanta had no shortage of scandalous divorces, but few had laid bare so starkly the clash of two worlds. On one side, a wealthy white family, renowned for real estate and banking. On the other, a black woman from Mechanicsville, raised in poverty but who had built a small law firm serving her community. Danielle, Ethan's voice cracked behind her, raw as though he had just lost everything. She stopped, turned. Light fell across his face, tall, handsome, still carrying the charm that once blinded her. But now, to her eyes, he was nothing more than a loser refusing to face the truth. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan," Danielle replied, her voice steady, each word deliberate. "The court has spoken. The firm is mine. The house, too. And most importantly, I still have myself." He sneered, stepping closer, his breath tinged with expensive liquor. "How long will you last without my family's backing? You're just some ghetto girl who got lucky enough to marry a Whitmore. Nothing more." The words lashed like a whip, but Danielle only closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, cold and unyielding. "I've heard enough." For 2 years of marriage, she had endured this humiliation, veiled jabs at her poor upbringing, blunt comparisons to better options. But now, before dozens of watching eyes, she was no longer the woman drowning in shame. "You're wrong," Danielle said, chin lifted high. "I existed before I met you, and I will continue long after you're nothing but a name in divorce records." Margaret Whitmore swept forward, her voice sharp as a razor. "Don't celebrate too soon. We will appeal." "Do you really think you can win forever?" Danielle met those icy eyes, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I think justice can win, and today it did." Without waiting, Danielle turned and strode down the hallway, but her body was trembling, every muscle stretched taut, as if about to snap. Sleepless nights, endless hours preparing files, Ethan's constant derision all pressed down on her frail frame. She hadn't eaten in 12 hours. Her breath came fast, her heart heavy. As the courthouse doors opened, Atlanta's autumn wind swept in, cool but dizzying. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust toward her. "Mrs. Carter, how do you feel after the verdict?" Are you afraid of the Whitmore family retaliating? What would you say to women going through divorce right now? Danielle forced a smile, but her legs faltered. She made it halfway down the stone steps before the world spun. Not now. I can't collapse in front of them. Her hand clutched the cold iron railing. The world tilted. Sounds blurred, leaving only the pounding of her own heart. The last image she saw was Ethan's half-smile in the crowd, a smile laced with cruel satisfaction. Then darkness closed in. But Danielle never hit the stone floor. Strong arms caught her just in time. Noise echoed back, startled cries rising, and a deep, steady voice murmured in her ear, "I've got you. Don't worry." In that hazy instant, her breath brushed against the simple scent of soap, so different from the luxury colognes Ethan wore. A blurred face came into view. Light brown hair, storm, grey eyes filled with genuine concern. Those arms tightened around her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The chaos on the courthouse steps muffled, as if behind thick glass. Danielle caught fragments. "Call an ambulance," hurried footsteps, cameras clicking, but closest was only the man's unyielding embrace. He lowered her carefully, one knee on the cold stone, cradling her head against his chest. Rough, steady fingers brushed across her pale face. "Breathe. Can you hear me?" "I'm here." Danielle opened her eyes through the dizziness and met his grey-blue like storm clouds gathering over Georgia before the rain. They held no disdain, no calculation, only genuine worry. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his anger giving way to panic. "Danielle, what the hell is happening?" He bent toward her, but the stranger's grip tightened, his voice sharp and low. "Step back. She needs air, not you." Ethan froze, seething. "Who the hell are you two?" The man lifted his head, locking eyes with him. His voice rang clear, firm enough for everyone to hear. "She's my wife." The entire staircase fell silent. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Margaret Whitmore gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Ethan turned pale, fists trembling. Danielle wanted to protest, to say, "No, that's not true." But her parched lips failed her, and a fragile, weary part of her found those words a shield. "My wife." Two words that felt false yet strangely steady, strangely warm. Sirens wailed in the distance. The stranger raised his head, calling out, "Over here. She needs medical help." Then softer, meant only for her, "It's okay. I won't let you fall." Paramedics rushed in, lowering a stretcher. One asked, "Are you family? We'll need information." The man didn't hesitate. "Husband." His voice was calm, unwavering, as if it were an undeniable truth. In that moment, Danielle saw Ethan recoil, his face twisted between fury and disbelief. "He can't stand losing control," she thought, "and he just lost me completely." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, she felt the stranger's hand clasping hers, refusing to let go. Even through the haze, she saw his eyes fixed on her face, steady and reassuring. "You are not alone." The ambulance doors closed, sirens piercing the air. Through the small window, Danielle caught a final glimpse of Ethan rooted to the steps, his eyes bewildered, empty. She saw fear in him for the first time, fear of losing what he once scorned. The ambulance rattled through downtown Atlanta, the smell of antiseptic mingled with the paramedics' radio chatter. Danielle lay on her side, oxygen mask pressed to her nose. The man sat beside her, his large hand covering hers like he would never let it slip. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. He smiled, so gently it eased her dizziness. "My name is Christopher Hayes. I just happened to be there." "No. Why did you say—" Danielle's voice faltered. Christopher leaned closer, his eyes holding an odd, sincere light. "Because I saw how he looked at you, like you were disposable, and I couldn't stand it. You're not. Never." The words were simple, but to Danielle, they poured warmth into the cracks inside her. No one had ever defended her like that. Even in marriage, Ethan had only spoken sweetly when it saved face, never once standing between her and the world. She closed her eyes, letting the sirens and machines fade. That name Christopher Hayes burned into her memory, along with the two words he had declared to the world, "My wife." That night, the emergency room of Grady Memorial Hospital glowed bright IV lines, blood pressure checks, and heart monitors. The doctors concluded, exhaustion, prolonged insomnia, compounded by stress. Christopher remained in the plastic chair beside her bed when everyone else left. He was so tall that it seemed too small, but his posture was patient and waiting. Under the harsh fluorescent light, his face bore the firm lines of a man used to work, yet his eyes stayed gentle, never leaving her. Danielle opened her eyes and whispered, "You are still here?" "Yes. I told you, I won't leave." She turned away, a tear slipping free. Why was it a stranger who stayed, while the man who once vowed to love her had only stood watching? Christopher slowly lifted a hand, not touching, only placing it near enough for her to know, "You don't have to say anything. Just rest. Tomorrow will be different." Danielle didn't know if tomorrow truly would be. But that night, in the cold hospital room, for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. High above in the Whitmore Tower downtown, Ethan sat in his office, pouring whiskey into a glass. The news replayed the courthouse scene, Danielle collapsing, a stranger catching her, declaring, "My wife." All of Atlanta was buzzing. Headlines blared, "Drama after Whitmore divorce. Who is Danielle Carter's real husband?" Ethan hurled the remote at the screen. The liquor sloshed, red as blood. He had never imagined a day when a stranger would steal that light, the light of Danielle, the rare gem he had lost. Margaret swept in, voice sharp. "You let the press humiliate this family? That woman and some vagrant making us look like clowns?" Ethan gripped his glass tighter, eyes clouded. Inside, something unfamiliar stirred, something pride had never allowed. Regret. Atlanta's night stretched. Its glittering lights starkly contrasted to the plain hospital room. Danielle drifted into sleep, her hand still resting inside Christopher's. And there, in that fragile moment between ruin and hope, her new story began. The wail of ambulance sirens still echoed in Danielle's head when she opened her eyes again. No more shouting, no more flashing blue and red lights, only the cold white ceiling of Grady Memorial Hospital. The sting of antiseptic filled her nose. Her body felt like lead, but at least she was alive. The first thing she noticed was her hand. It wasn't dangling into emptiness, it was enclosed in another hand, larger, rough, but steady. She turned her head and saw the stranger sitting beside her. His flannel shirt was wrinkled, his jeans faded, his work boots scuffed at the heels. He belonged nowhere near lawyers or tycoons. He looked at her, relief flashing in his eyes. "You're awake. Thank God." Danielle swallowed hard, her throat dry and raw. You're still here." "Of course," he said. "I wasn't going anywhere." She wanted to scoff, to ask why a stranger would cling to her side, but her throat lacked the strength. Instead, she closed her eyes and exhaled. A part of her, worn thin after months of battles, felt grateful for his presence. Outside in the hallway, nurses' footsteps and intercom calls blended into the familiar rhythm of Atlanta's public hospitals. Hurried, weary, under-resourced. Danielle knew this picture well. She had defended countless patients who had been denied health insurance, and now she lay in the bed, under the cold fluorescent light. The man was quiet before introducing himself softly. "I'm Christopher Hayes." He extended his hand, as if this were an ordinary meeting. Danielle glanced at his hand, then at her own still resting inside it. After a moment's hesitation, she whispered, "Danielle Carter." A smile flickered across his lips. "I know." "You know? I saw you in court, in the room next door. I was there helping my sister. She's divorcing too, and she's in a similar mess. I noticed you then. You walked out looking like you were carrying the whole world." Danielle turned away, her heart tightening. "Carrying the whole world, yes. But who will take me?" A cough shook her body. Christopher quickly stood, poured water, and steadied her as she sat up. His movements were firm, practiced, as if he'd done this his whole life. Danielle sipped, her throat easing. "You don't need to be here," she said quietly, trying to reclaim distance. "I'm not your responsibility." Christopher sat back down, his gaze unflinching. "Maybe not, but I want to be here. I couldn't stand seeing you collapse like that, as if the crowd waited for you to fall so they could laugh. The words struck deep. How many times had she felt like nothing more than the Whitmores' charity project, the poor black woman they paraded as proof of tolerance? And now, here was someone who saw her differently. For a few minutes, silence filled the room. Danielle listened to the rain outside the storm season in Atlanta, sudden downpours lashing the windows, whispering like secrets. Why did you say that in front of everyone?" she asked, trembling. "You called me your wife." Christopher hesitated, then said plainly, "Because I needed to protect you. You needed a shield, and I could give it. I don't regret it." Danielle was speechless. She should have been furious at the lie. Instead, her chest swelled with a strange mix of shame and warmth. Just then, the door swung open. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "Your blood pressure is stabilizing, but you need to rest at least one night. I'll inform the doctor." She glanced at Christopher, and she looked curious. "Your husband hasn't left her side." Danielle almost objected, but Christopher only smiled and nodded. "Yes, I'll stay with her." The nurse smiled approvingly, then left. Silence settled once more. Danielle turned to him, her eyes narrowing with challenge. "See, one lie leads to another. How long do you plan to keep this up?" Christopher didn't flinch. "As long as you need, until you're ready to stand alone and no longer need me." His answer stunned Danielle. No possession, no demand, just rare patience she had never known. She turned away, hiding the tear that threatened to fall. One question echoed inside. Can I trust a stranger when the one I trusted most was the one who destroyed me? Rain streaked across the window, streetlights blurring into watery trails. Danielle lay still, but her mind churned. Christopher's words repeated in her head, "As long as you need." They sounded like both a promise and a trap. 2 years of marriage to Ethan had taught her a brutal lesson. Beautiful promises came hand in hand with betrayal. He had promised to support her career, yet he gave her only control and infidelity. He had promised to shield her from his family's contempt, yet he became her harshest tormentor. And this man, she wondered, a stranger, dressed like a laborer, calloused hands, yet eyes so gentle they made her heart stumble. He hadn't promised much, only that he would stay, and he had. Christopher stepped out briefly. When he returned, he carried a paper bag from a diner near the hospital. He set it down, opening it to reveal hot chicken soup, slices of bread, and bottled water. "This place only serves packaged food. I thought you might need something real." He pulled his chair closer. Danielle looked, and a faint laugh escaped her. "Do you always bring meals to strange women in hospitals?" Christopher shrugged. "Only the ones who nearly collapse on courthouse steps and scare me half to death." The words caught her off guard, then made her truly laugh for the first time in months. She took the spoon, sipping slowly. The savory warmth spread through her empty stomach, easing the ache. She ate every drop. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "You're welcome." "Everyone deserves a full meal after a day like that," Christopher replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The simplicity of his care unsettled Danielle. She had grown up fending for herself, working jobs as a teenager, winning scholarships, building her law office from scratch. Ethan had come like a dazzling dream, but only left her feeling small. And Christopher, a stranger, made her think safe. Near midnight, the door opened. A familiar figure appeared, Ethan. Still in his expensive suit, tie loosened, his face worn and angry. "Danielle." His voice was tight. "I heard you collapsed." Christopher immediately rose, placing himself in front of her bed. "She needs rest. You should leave." Ethan sneered, jealousy flashing in his eyes. "And who the hell are you? Why are you here?" Christopher didn't blink. "I already told you. I'm her husband." The room froze. Danielle wanted to object, but her throat tightened. Ethan glared at her, then at Christopher. "Wife?" Ethan scoffed. "You think some lowly worker can replace me? She'll never." Christopher stepped forward, voice dropping, sharp as steel. "You had your chance to protect her, and you failed. Now leave, before I forget this is a hospital." Ethan stood silent for a long moment, then spun on his heel, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Tension dissolved, leaving heavy quiet. Danielle closed her eyes, catching her breath. She couldn't understand why a stranger would dare stand against Ethan, a man with money and power enough to crush anyone. But in that instant, her heart warmed, as if finally shielded after years of being alone. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the blinds. Danielle woke to see Christopher still there, his head tilted against the chair, dozing lightly. The light revealed the calluses on his hands, the veins across his strong arms. He didn't look like a man pretending. She shifted slightly. His eyes opened at once, and he smiled. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Better, but you didn't have to stay all night." "Maybe not, but I wanted to." He stretched, then added, "Someone should ensure you eat breakfast. I know a little spot nearby, best biscuits and coffee in Atlanta." Danielle meant to refuse, but when she saw the patience in his eyes, she only sighed and gave a slight nod. Deep down, she knew her life had just taken an unexpected turn. The man who appeared on the courthouse steps with strong arms and two simple words, "My wife," had opened a door full of risk and hope. Mornings at Grady Memorial Hospital were unlike anywhere else in the city. The sharp scent of disinfectant drifted down the halls, blending with the steady crackle of the intercom calling doctors to the ER. Outside the glass windows, ambulances streamed in and out, carrying fragments of broken lives. On the third floor, Danielle Carter sat upright against her pillows, her eyes still swollen after a restless night. On the tray beside her was the hospital's breakfast, a flimsy container of watery oatmeal and a cup of lukewarm coffee. She looked at it with a faint grimace. But right beside her, in the plastic chair, Christopher Hayes was already waiting. In front of him sat a paper bag from a local diner, the aroma of butter biscuits and freshly roasted coffee filling the room. As soon as he saw her awake, he rose and stepped forward. "Grady's coffee couldn't save anyone. I thought you needed something better." He opened the bag, laying out a box of steaming biscuits and a hot-to-go cup in his hand. Danielle blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to go through the trouble." "It's no trouble," Christopher said, placing the cup in her hand. "You had a hell of a day. At least breakfast can make up for it." She hesitated, then sipped. The coffee was rich, slightly bitter, but it awakened her senses. Danielle felt warmth spreading through her body for the first time in days. Silence lingered for a while. Christopher leaned against the window frame, morning light falling across his face. "I know yesterday was a lot. I said I was your husband. If that upset you, I'm sorry." Danielle set down the cup, clutching the blanket tighter. "Do you realize the whole city is buzzing about that? The news, the blogs, everyone asking about my mystery husband." Christopher scratched the back of his head sheepishly. "I just wanted to protect you. When I saw him, Ethan, coming at you, I thought he'd hurt you again. I didn't think beyond that." She sighed. "You don't know that family. They have money, connections. They'll dig up every detail, twist it until I'm a joke in the headlines. They won't let this go." "Then let them think what they want," Christopher said firmly. "You won in court. You don't need to prove anything else to them." Danielle fell silent. She saw a quiet certainty in his eyes, unlike Ethan, who had always told her she was lucky to have the Whitmore name on her back. Christopher told her she was strong enough on her own, and strangely, she wanted to believe him. A nurse entered, checking her vitals and adjusting the IV line. She smiled. "You look much better today. I think tomorrow you can be discharged." "Thank you," Danielle nodded. When the nurse left, Christopher asked, "If you're discharged tomorrow, will someone pick you up?" Danielle froze. Her mother was frail, living on the outskirts of town. Her closest friends were swamped with work, almost no one. She had once believed Ethan would be her anchor, but that illusion had long died. "No," she admitted. "I'll call a cab." Christopher shook his head. "No need. I'll take you home." "You don't owe me anything," Danielle started, but he raised a hand to stop her. "It's not about owing. I want to. No one should walk out of a hospital alone after collapsing in public." His words caught in her throat. In his eyes, there was no pity, only plain care, the very thing she had been starved of for years. By midday, Christopher was telling small stories about helping a friend fix a truck, about long days working construction under Georgia's blistering Sunday. His voice was low, sometimes laced with humor. Danielle listened, and for the first time in months, she laughed aloud. "You're in construction?" she asked. "Yeah." "Not glamorous, but honest." Christopher shrugged. "I like seeing something I've built stand solid before me. Not like those shady contracts people wave around." Danielle smiled faintly, then fell quiet. She remembered Ethan bragging about investments and glittering parties full of the wealthy, where she always felt like an outsider. She had never belonged there. "What are you thinking about?" Christopher asked. "That maybe I've lived with false things too long," Danielle murmured. "And today feels different." Christopher only smiled, his eyes soft. Danielle sat by the window in the evening, watching thin rain streaks across the hospital roof. Atlanta hummed outside, but the room was still. "Mr. Hayes," she whispered. "Christopher," he corrected. "Christopher." Danielle hesitated. "You don't know me. I don't know you. But thank you for staying." He nodded. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what was right." Danielle turned away, hiding a faint smile. Inside, she knew his presence wasn't just the right thing. It was the beginning of something fragile, but life-changing. Night deepened, the halls quieted, but Danielle's room stayed lit. Christopher sat by her bed, his shirt wrinkled after a long day. He didn't look weary, only watchful, adjusting her blanket when she shifted. "You don't have to do this," she murmured, staring at the ceiling. "I've been through worse nights alone." "Maybe so," Christopher said, his voice warm and steady. "But no one should get used to being alone when they're at their weakest." Danielle turned, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "That sounds easy to say. You don't know what it's like to be looked down on for years. To be told you're just a project girl, a temporary plaything." Christopher stayed quiet, but his hand closed firmly around hers. "I know what it's like to be underestimated. My father died young, and my mother raised us alone. People always thought we were nothing, but she taught me this. Your worth isn't in someone else's pocket, it's in how you treat people." The words sank into Danielle like a balm. Ethan had spouted countless philosophies, all to excuse betrayal. Christopher spoke plainly, with no polish, and that made it real. Near midnight, the door swung open again. Ethan. His suit was still flawless, but his eyes were bloodshot. He stepped in, ignoring Christopher. "Danielle, you can't trust him. He's just using you." Danielle leaned back, weary. "And you didn't use me? You stripped me of my confidence, made me believe I was nothing without the Whitmores." Ethan's mouth opened, but Christopher rose, cutting him off. "You need to leave. She needs peace. And who the hell are you?" Ethan spat. Christopher didn't blink. "The only one here who cares about her without money or reputation in the way." The tension pressed down like a weight. Ethan looked to Danielle, expecting her to defend him, but she only turned her face away, her voice quiet but resolute. "Go, Ethan. We're finished." Ethan froze. He wanted to argue, but Danielle's eyes told him there was no return. He left, the door slamming shut, like the final cut to the past. Afterward, Danielle trembled, but Christopher sat back down, taking her hand gently. "It's over. He can't hurt you anymore." She gave a sad smile. "You don't know him, or his family. They can crush anyone. Then let them try." "I'll be here," Christopher said, as if it were the most straightforward fact. Danielle studied him, doubt and trust flickering in her gaze. She wanted to remind him he was just a construction worker. But looking into his eyes, she saw what she had lost long ago: sincerity. The next morning, Danielle was cleared for discharge. Christopher handled the paperwork and wheeled her to the exit. Morning wind swept across the parking lot, sunlight glinting off car roofs. "You don't have to be my chauffeur," she said wryly. "I've always handled myself. Sometimes it's okay to let someone else handle things," Christopher replied, opening the door of his old pickup. Danielle eyed it and chuckled. "Does it even run?" "Runs fine. It's carried me through more jobs than I can count." He helped her in, movements firm but gentle. As they drove through Atlanta, skyscrapers of banking towers loomed over old neighborhoods with peeling paint and graffiti. Danielle watched the view and was reminded of the class divide she had fought against all her life. "Where do you live?" she asked. "East Atlanta," Christopher said. "Working class side. Not far from where you grew up. Danielle nodded. There was comfort in that answer, like they belonged to the same world, even if they had just met. When the truck pulled to her apartment, she lingered a moment before opening the door. Thank you. Not just for the ride. For staying. Christopher smiled. I told you. No one should be alone in their hardest times. Danielle stepped into her quiet apartment, leaning against the door, her heart tangled. She didn't know if she could trust Christopher, but deep down, she knew. A new chapter had opened, and it had begun at her most fragile place on a hospital bed in a public ward, where a stranger held her hand all night long. Danielle's new apartment sat on the third floor of an old building in East Atlanta Village, where the red bricks were chipped and the iron stairs squeaked with every step. The smell of fried food from the small diner downstairs filled the hallway, mixing with bleach and mildew. It wasn't luxurious or convenient, but the rent was affordable and, most importantly, belonged to her. She stood in the empty living room, staring at the cracked, stained walls. The grand Whitmore mansion where she had once been treated with disdain was now only a memory. This was a new beginning, however modest. Yet as she looked around, her chest tightened. Too much to fix, and too little money left. That afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. Danielle opened it to find Christopher, holding a heavy toolbox in his hand. He wore a grey t-shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed work boots. I figured you could use some help, he said, lifting the box as proof. Danielle raised an eyebrow. You think I can't handle it myself? Not at all. Christopher smiled, gentle and steady. But it's more fun with two. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The room soon filled with the sounds of paint cans opening, the smell of latex and dust rising. Christopher spread plastic sheets on the floor, showing her how to roll paint evenly. His movements were sharp and practiced, years of experience clear in each stroke. Danielle, in an old t-shirt with her hair tied up, gripped the roller. She never imagined she'd be painting the walls of her tiny apartment with a near stranger. Yet Christopher's presence didn't feel intrusive. Strangely, it brought peace. What color do you want? He asked, stirring the paint. Light green, she said after a pause. Something that feels like hope. Christopher nodded, smiling. Then let's fill this whole place with hope. They began. At first, the strokes were patchy, but slowly the old walls turned into smooth plains of soft green. Danielle carefully covered the corners while Christopher knelt to paint the baseboards. The space between them shrank. Their hands brushed when they dipped their brushes in the bucket. Neither spoke, letting the music from Danielle's old radio fill the silence. A soul song from the 70s hummed through the air, slow and steady, drawing them closer. Midway through, Christopher dropped onto the floor, wiping sweat from his brow. Danielle set her roller down and leaned against the wall beside him. When did you start in construction? She asked. As a teenager. My dad got sick, so I gave up my dream of studying architecture to work. I don't regret it. At least I got to build something real. His voice was calm, but a shadow passed in his eyes. Danielle nodded. I've given things up, too. I once dreamed of opening a legal clinic for women without money, so they wouldn't lose their kids or get cheated just because they couldn't afford an attorney. Christopher studied her. And why not? She smiled sadly. Because dreams don't pay the bills. My small practice barely stays afloat. After the divorce, I'm nearly broke. He was quiet momentarily, then said softly, Not every dream needs money. Some need faith and someone willing to stand beside you. Danielle froze. She wanted to dismiss it, but his words struck a hidden chord she had buried long ago. By evening, they sat on the floor eating pizza straight from the box, rollers and paint cans scattered around them. Danielle bit into a slice, tomato sauce smearing the corner of her mouth. She grabbed a napkin quickly, but Christopher laughed and handed her another. You're laughing at me? She narrowed her eyes. No, I see you. Ordinary, human. And that's more beautiful than any magazine cover. Her cheeks flushed, and she turned away. It had been so long since anyone looked at her that way, not as the Whitmores' charity case or a sharp lawyer, but simply as a woman trying to live. When Christopher packed up to leave late that night, Danielle stood at the door, watching his figure disappear down the creaking stairs. The apartment now smelled of fresh paint, but the scent carried something else inside her, the feeling of a true beginning. For the first time in months, Danielle believed her past could stay behind. And here, in this small apartment with its soft green walls, she could start rebuilding her life, not alone. The next morning, sunlight cut through the thin curtains, glowing across the freshly painted walls. The pale green reflected the light, making the room shine like it had never before. Danielle padded barefoot across the old wooden floor, breathing in the lingering scent of paint. This apartment truly felt hers for the first time, a space untouched by the Whitmores. A knock came at the door. Danielle opened it to find Christopher holding 2 coffees and a paper bag of warm bagels. He grinned. "Painters need breakfast. You're here early." Danielle sounded surprised, but she accepted the cup. "My job starts late today. I figured we could finish a few more things around here." They worked side by side again. Christopher measured the windows, tightened loose hinges, and replaced broken bulbs. Danielle followed, learning how to use a drill, how to drive screws straight. She had never held tools before, but his patience coaxed her into trying. When her drill slipped and chipped the plaster, she burst into laughter, covering her mouth. Christopher steadied her hand, guiding it back into place. "Don't force it. Let the machine do the work," he murmured, his breath close enough to make her pulse skip. By noon, they sat on the narrow balcony overlooking the street. Below, kids kicked a ball while rap music blared from a neighbor's speaker. Danielle finished her bagel and asked quietly, "Don't you think it's strange? A lawyer and a construction worker sitting here like this, as friends?" Christopher shrugged. "Work doesn't define a person. I see a woman strong enough to start over. That's what I respect." Danielle was silent. She was used to compliments about being beautiful or smart, always with strings attached. This was the first time someone respected her simply for who she was. "Mr. Hayes," she began. "Christopher," he corrected gently, smiling. "Christopher, do you ever think about the future? I mean, a life beyond just the work you do now?" His gaze drifted outward, his eyes catching the light. "I once dreamed of designing buildings, creating something that would stand long after me. But when my father died, I had to work to support my mum and sister. The future, I guess I never let myself dream too far again." Danielle's heart clenched. She saw a familiar sacrifice in him, the kind her mother had made. "You deserve to dream. Don't let go of that." Christopher turned back to her, his eyes deep. "Maybe now I have a reason to dream again." Danielle's breath caught, and she quickly looked down at the street. But his words etched themselves inside her. By evening, the living room was nearly complete. The green walls glowed in the golden light of new bulbs. Danielle placed her mother's photo on the shelf, feeling a wave of safety she hadn't felt in years. Christopher packed up his tools. Before leaving, he looked around. "This place, it feels like a home now. Like you're building yourself back up." Danielle didn't answer immediately. She stared at the walls, then at him. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." He shook his head. "You've done more than you think. I just helped keep the roller straight." A pause settled between them. Their eyes met, and Danielle's heartbeat quickened. She turned away, opening the door. "You should get some rest. Work tomorrow." Christopher nodded, lifting his toolbox into the hallway. Before leaving, he said softly, "I'll be back. Not just for the apartment." When the door closed, Danielle leaned against it, her thoughts tangled. She didn't know if she could trust a man again. But one thing was sure. With Christopher, this apartment was more than just a place to live. It was the beginning of a new life. Danielle was immersed in a crucial case 2 weeks after leaving the hospital. A young Latina mother, Lucia Ramirez, was fighting her wealthy ex-husband for custody of their son. The opposing lawyer's argument was as cruel as it was blunt. She cannot provide a life worthy of the father's class. Danielle knew this battle went far beyond legalities. It was a reflection of her own life class, money, and racial prejudice. In court, Lucia trembled, but her eyes shone with resolve when Danielle squeezed her hand and whispered, "We'll fight to the end." On the spectator bench sat Christopher, in a plain shirt, dark jeans, and worn work boots. He watched silently, his eyes never leaving Danielle. And each time she turned, his gaze steadied her without a word. Danielle rose to deliver her argument. Her voice rang through the courtroom. "Your Honor, the question today is not how much money Lucia has, but how much love she gives her child. A child does not need yachts or mansions. He needs warm arms, a home where he is heard and protected. Justice cannot define motherhood by a bank account." Every word was a message to her own past. The opposition objected, but the judge listened closely. During recess, Danielle stepped into the hallway. Christopher was already waiting, handing her a bottle of water. "You did great," he said, pride in his voice. "You just called me what?" Danielle froze. Christopher gave a faint smile. "Sorry. Habit." "Danielle, you did great." The word you fell so naturally she couldn't protest. Her heart skipped, though her mind stayed guarded. "Don't forget Ethan's words. Don't forget the cost of trusting too soon." She sipped, avoiding his eyes. "It's not over. The rebuttal's still ahead." Christopher nodded firmly. "But I believe you'll win." That afternoon, when the judge ruled that Lucia Ramirez would keep custody, the courtroom fell silent momentarily, then erupted in tears and applause. Lucia clutched her son, whispering "Gracias" over and over. Danielle stepped back, letting the moment belong to them. Pride swelled in her chest. "This is why I became a lawyer, to fight for those dismissed as less." Christopher pushed through the crowd, resting a hand briefly on her shoulder, his voice low. "You just changed 2 lives, both mother and child." Danielle shivered at his touch, startled by its warmth. She quickly slipped free and murmured, "Not me, justice." Yet deep down, she knew his presence had given her the strength to fight. That evening, they met at a small cafe in Inman Park. Not a grand restaurant, just a cozy spot with soft golden lights. Danielle chose a quiet corner, away from curious eyes. "Congratulations on your win," Christopher said, raising his cup. Danielle smiled faintly. "One victory doesn't change the world, but it changes a child's future. That is changing the world." She looked at him. His eyes held a trust with no conditions. For years, she had only known doubt and scrutiny. Now a man sat before her, asking for nothing, simply believing. "Christopher," she began softly, hesitating, "you don't really know me. I'm broken. I'm not sure I can start again." He set his cup down, his tone steady. "I'm not asking you to start over immediately. I want to walk with you no matter how slow. One day, one step." Danielle turned away, her eyes glistening. Inside her waged 2 warring feelings, the longing to trust and the fear of betrayal. After the cafe, she returned to her small apartment, torn between warmth and unease. She sat by the window, staring down at rain-slicked streets. Christopher's voice echoed in her head. One day, one step. She wanted to believe. But belief had cost her dearly before. Ethan, too, had once whispered sweet words, held her hand, and promised forever until the nights grew long and cold, and she was left alone in a mansion of silence. Her heart raced beneath her palm. Am I going too far, too fast? Yet when she remembered Christopher's steady eyes in the courtroom, she felt something different. No arrogance, no possessiveness, only a rare respect. A week later, Christopher invited her to Aunt Lou's Soul Food Kitchen, a bustling West End spot famous for crispy fried chicken and golden cornbread. The air buzzed with laughter, tables crowded tight. "Watch out," Christopher said as they entered. "Aunt Lou asks more questions than any lawyer." Sure enough, a plump woman with salt and pepper curls burst from the kitchen. "Chris Hayes, about time you brought someone for me to meet." Christopher flushed, while Danielle froze. Aunt Lou gave her a once-over, then laughed heartily. "Lord, you're beautiful. No wonder this boy's been gone for weeks." Danielle blushed. "We're just friends." "Friends, sure. But the way he looks at you, honey, I know better." Aunt Lou winked, then wagged a finger at Christopher. "You treat her right, you hear. If I see her cry, you'll answer to me." The room roared with laughter. Danielle's cheeks burned, but her chest warmed. For the first time in months, she felt seen simply as a woman, not a spectacle. Over dinner, They spoke of her cases, her long hours. Christopher listened intently, asking piercing but straightforward questions. "When you're in court," he said, "your eyes light up, like that's where you belong." Danielle smiled faintly. "Maybe, but that light has a cost. Exhaustion, sleepless nights, nearly losing everything after the divorce. But you still rose again," Christopher said, his tone admiring. "That makes you different." Danielle lowered her gaze, hiding the flutter in her chest. Deep down, she knew she was beginning to need him, and that need terrified her. Late that night, Christopher walked her home. The streets were quiet, the air cool. She began to thank him at her door, but he caught her hand gently. "Danielle," she looked up. Under the street lamp, his storm-gray eyes were soft, yet fierce with something unspoken. "I know you're afraid. I know you've been betrayed, but I'm not him. I won't disappear when you need me most." Her heartbeat thundered. She wanted to answer, but her throat closed. The closeness both drew her in and made her panic. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. Christopher nodded, voice firm. "I'm not promising. I'm telling the truth." Danielle felt a fragile wall within her begin to crack at that moment. She stepped forward, barely, and let him kiss her. The kiss was hesitant at first, then deepened, not rushed, not desperate, but steady. A quiet confirmation that they had found something worth trusting, however fragile. Danielle rested her forehead against his shoulder when they parted, whispering, "This scares me, but makes me feel alive." Christopher wrapped her close, his voice low. "Then let's be scared together, and live together." That night, lying in her small bed, Danielle still felt the warmth of his kiss. Yet in her mind echoed a warning from the past. Don't trust too soon. Don't be hurt again. She closed her eyes, knowing the road ahead would be filled with trials. But she was willing to walk it for the first time no longer alone. November in Atlanta carried a chill in the air and a clear blue sky. The trees shed orange and gold leaves on the sidewalks, forming a bright carpet. Danielle slowly walked beside Christopher, in a thin sweater with her hands tucked into her pockets. Her pockets had just left the courthouse after a modest case. No headlines, no spotlight, but justice served for an older woman whom the bank had tried to force out of her home. Christopher walked in silence at her side, every so often lifting a hand to shield her from the sudden gusts of wind. They wandered into a small park and sat on a stone bench. Danielle leaned back, her gaze drifting up to the sky. "Do you ever think about settling down?" she asked softly. Christopher looked surprised. "Settling down? How?" "A family, a home, a place that's ours." Danielle turned to him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "I think about that every day, but I wasn't sure if you were ready to hear it." Her heart thudded. She thought of the nights in her new apartment, of Christopher changing light bulbs, painting walls. Deep down, she already knew her answer. One weekend evening, Christopher invited her on a trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains. They drove 3 hours, leaving the city behind, winding through pine-shadowed roads. When they arrived, the sun had dipped behind the ridges, leaving a blaze of crimson sky. Christopher pitched a tent and built a fire while Danielle laid out the food he'd brought: roasted chicken, potatoes, and Aunt Lou's cornbread wrapped in foil. The crisp mountain air made her feel 18 again when life was simpler. After dinner, they sat close by the fire. Danielle rested her head on his shoulder, eyes tracing the stars slowly emerging overhead. "It's been so long since I felt peaceful like this," she murmured. Christopher stayed quiet for a while, then turned toward her. The flames lit his face, making his eyes look like they carried the night sky. His hand slipped into his coat pocket, hesitating. "Danielle," he said, voice deep and steady, "I know we've only just begun, but I don't want to waste more time not saying this." She lifted her head, pulse racing. He pulled out a small box and opened it. Inside lay a simple silver ring, set with a single stone that glimmered in the firelight. No luxury, no show, just truth. "Will you marry me?" Christopher asked, his voice husky. The world stilled around her. Images surged: hospital nights of loneliness, the humiliation at the Whitmores' hands, and then his hands. The ones that caught her when she collapsed, the ones that held the paint roller beside hers, the ones that soothed wounds no one could see. Tears welled as she nodded. Yes, Christopher exhaled in relief, a broad smile breaking across his face. He slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their kiss under the mountain sky was quiet, unpretentious, a simple vow that two broken hearts had found each other. That night in the tent, he held her close. His voice whispered against her hair, "I can't promise wealth or a life of luxury, but I promise honesty, and that I'll be by your side, no matter how hard it gets." Danielle closed her eyes, each word stitching together tears in her heart. Yet still, a whisper inside asked, "Is this real? Will it be different this time?" She pushed the fear aside and tightened her grip on his hand. "All I need is exactly what you said, honesty and presence." He kissed her forehead. "Then we already have everything." Back in Atlanta, her apartment seemed transformed. The simple silver band gleamed on her finger, and suddenly the green-painted walls and rusted window frames seemed touched by promise. The next morning, she stood before the mirror, studying the ring and laughing softly. Not because of its price, it was nothing compared to Ethan's lavish jewels. But within that circle of silver lay truth. Love did not need money to prove itself. A few days later, Danielle met Monica Price, her college friend, at a midtown cafe buzzing with young attorneys. Monica nearly spilled her latte when Danielle lifted her hand. "Oh my God, you're engaged," Monica squealed. Danielle chuckled, nodding. "Yeah." Surprised? Monica clasped her hands. "Listen, I am happy for you. You deserve joy. But are you sure? It's only been months since the divorce. I don't want you hurt again." Danielle sighed. "I know. But Chris is different. With him, I don't feel like I have to measure up. I get to be myself." Monica nodded slowly, though worry lingered in her eyes. "Just make sure he truly is who you think. Don't let old wounds blur your judgment." The words stuck with Danielle, but she clutched the ring tighter and answered, "I believe this time is different." That night, Christopher invited her over. His apartment surprised her tidy, warm, with shelves lined with books on architecture and construction. A guitar leaned against the wall in the corner, dust on its strings. "You play?" Danielle asked. Christopher looked sheepish. "Used to, not much anymore." He lifted it, strumming softly. The sound was rough but warm. "Play for me," Danielle urged, settling on the couch. After a pause, he began a slow melody, his voice low and raw. The song spoke of being lost, then finding light in someone else. Danielle listened in silence, her chest tightening. When he finished, the room held only their breath. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "Did you write it?" He nodded. "For the woman who changed my life." Their eyes met, and the space between them dissolved. Danielle leaned forward, kissing him. This time, the kiss carried no hesitation, only longing and certainty that neither wanted to step back. Days turned into plans. They spoke of a small house in the suburbs, a garden with flowers and vegetables, and children's laughter filling the yard. Danielle shared her dream of a legal clinic for women without resources, so that no one would face the system alone. Christopher listened, his eyes shining. "I want to build it for you," he said. "Not with money or papers, with my own hands, brick by brick." Danielle laughed softly. "I don't need bricks, just you beside me." But deep inside, unease gnawed at Christopher. He knew he could do far more than lay bricks by a building, fund an entire organization. The secret of who he truly was loomed larger with every shared dream. One evening, as Danielle slept on the couch after a long day, Christopher silently sat beside her. His fingers brushed the ring on her hand, his heart heavy. "If you knew I wasn't just a working man, would you still look at me the same way?" Outside, rain tapped against the roof. In the hush, he whispered a vow only he could hear. "I'll find a way to tell you the truth, but not tonight. Tonight, you deserve peace." He pulled a blanket over her and watched until dawn's first light broke through the window. December swept Atlanta into a sharper chill than usual. Shops along Peachtree hung glittering Christmas lights, the streets alive with holiday cheer. Danielle stepped out of the Fulton County Courthouse after a grueling hearing, pulling her heavy coat tighter. As she descended the stone steps, a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop before her. The window slid down, and Christopher leaned out. "Hop in. Walking 6 blocks to the train is too cold for you." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you borrow this from?" "Looks expensive." Christopher hesitated. "A friend. I helped fix their garage." It was a reasonable answer, but how his eyes flickered away left her unsettled. He always said he was just a simple laborer, driving an old pickup. Now here he was in leather seats that still smelled new. She climbed in without another word, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. Danielle found something strange the next day at her small law office. On her desk sat a thick envelope, no sender listed. Inside lay a check for $50,000, a donation large enough to clear rent debts and expand services. Her breath caught. The first thought that came to mind, Christopher. But when she called, he only chuckled. "I wish I had that kind of money. Sorry, not me." His voice was casual, but a dull ache stirred in her chest. Something didn't add up. A man who lived paycheck to paycheck couldn't brush shoulders with luxury cars or friends who wrote checks like that. The unease deepened over dinner with Monica and Danielle's old friends at a Buckhead bar. Christopher got pulled into a conversation about markets and tech. To Danielle's shock, he spoke fluently, tossing precise terms, analyzing trends like someone inside the industry. Monica shot Danielle a pointed look. Danielle forced a smile, though her stomach churned. Later, as they drove home, she asked quietly, "You said you work in construction. How do you know so much about tech markets?" Christopher paused, then shrugged. "I read. And hey, a builder can still be curious about tech, right?" It sounded plausible, but not enough. Danielle fell silent, fingers twisting her engagement ring. That night, as Christopher slept, Danielle lay awake, her thoughts restless. Memories of Ethan's evasions haunted her. He had once hidden truths, his silences stretching until they crushed her. She looked at Christopher's peaceful face, his calloused hands resting on the blanket. She wanted to believe he was different, but her cautious mind whispered, "There's something he's not telling you, and sooner or later, it will surface." Work consumed her at year's end. Danielle often came home late, yet every night Christopher was waiting at her door, warm takeout in hand. His patience, his care, it should have calmed her. Instead, the perfection itself felt suspicious. One evening, his phone buzzed on the table as he washed dishes. The screen lit. "Meeting with board, 8 a.m. Danielle froze. Board? She told herself it could mean a construction committee. However, the phrasing and the polished calendar entry mirrored the corporate emails she once glimpsed in Ethan's world. When Christopher returned, she forced a smile. Inside, her pulse was unsteady. Another afternoon, Danielle drove by a site Christopher claimed he was working on. She asked a few workers, but none recognized his name. The supervisor shook his head. "No Chris Hayes here." Her heart raced as she left. The fragments piled higher, the SUV, the anonymous check, the technical knowledge, now a lie about work. That night, when Christopher arrived with a fruit basket, she stared at him longer than usual. He was gentle and warm, but now a fog of doubt veiled everything. Christmas neared. Monica invited Danielle to a non-profit gala. Reluctant but unwilling to offend, she agreed and brought Christopher. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, suits, and gowns swirling. Danielle's eyes stayed fixed on Christopher. In his tailored suit, moving easily among strangers, the way he shook hands, the ease in his speech, "Nothing about him," said construction worker. Then, an older businessman approached, pausing mid-step. His eyes widened. "Mr. Hayes? I thought you were in New York." Christopher stiffened for a fraction of a second, then chuckled, clapping the man's shoulder. "You've mistaken me. Just a builder. That's all." The crowd laughed, but Danielle felt ice in her veins. That man hadn't been mistaken. The ride home was thick with silence. Danielle stared out at the glowing streets, then spoke, voice raw. Who are you, really, Chris? Please don't give me more half-truths. I've lived through enough lies. Christopher gripped the wheel, jaw tight. His eyes flickered with turmoil. At last, he whispered, "Danielle, please, give me more time." Time for what? For me to stumble over more pieces that don't fit? You live like two different men. Which one is real? He glanced at her, desperation in his gaze. I never lied about what I feel for you. Everything else. I'll explain. Just not tonight. Danielle let out a bitter laugh, tears stinging. Do you know my greatest fear? Not poverty, not struggle, but being deceived, being treated like a fool. If you can't be honest, then this ring means nothing. Her trembling fingers slid off the band, placing it on the dashboard. The silence between them stretched until the car pulled up to her apartment. Without a word, she opened the door and walked away, not once looking back. Inside the SUV, Christopher slumped over the steering wheel, exhaling hard. The secret he had carried, the truth of his wealth, his power now loomed as the wall between them. He knew, if he stayed silent, he would lose her. But if he told her, he might lose her too. The new year swept into Atlanta with biting cold. Danielle threw herself into work, desperate to avoid thinking about Christopher. The ring still sat in her desk drawer, its silver glinting whenever she opened it. Each glimpse twisted her chest tighter. One morning, at a cafe near her office, a local news broadcast flickered across the mounted TV. The anchor's cheerful tone rang out, "Economic news. Christopher Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global Tech, has just been awarded a humanitarian prize for donating $100 million to education programs across the South. Known as one of the most private billionaires, Mr. Hayes rarely appears in the media." The screen filled with his image, Christopher, in a black tuxedo, shaking hands with the governor, camera flashes igniting his smile, a smile that suddenly looked foreign. Danielle's coffee slipped from her hand, splattering across the floor. She stared at the screen, numb. The name, the face, the voice undeniable. The man who claimed to be a simple construction worker was a tech billionaire, a figure from the world she despised. Her ears rang, her heartbeat thundered. The pieces snapped together like blades, the SUV, the anonymous check, the fluent tech talk. Lies, all of it. She drove in a haze straight to the glass tower of Hayes Global Tech downtown, a monument of wealth and power. Standing at its base, Danielle felt small, swallowed. Inside, the lobby buzzed with suited employees moving like clockwork. At the front desk, she gave her name. The receptionist only nodded, lifting the phone. "Mr. Hayes left instructions. Please proceed to the 30th floor." The elevator carried her up. When the doors slid open, Christopher was waiting. Gone were the worn flannel and steel-toe boots. He stood in a grey suit, navy tie, radiating the quiet authority of a man in command. Only his eyes, shadowed with worry, belonged to the Christopher she knew. "Danielle," he began, stepping forward. "Don't." Her voice cracked sharply, cold as steel. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Look at me, and tell me again you're just a construction worker. You let me believe that for months." He opened his mouth, but she lifted her hand. "You let me believe I was safe, that I wasn't back in the world of wealth and contempt. And you turned me into a fool." Again, Christopher's hands curled into fists, his voice rough. "I didn't want you to love me for money. I wanted you to love me for who I am." Danielle laughed bitterly, choking on tears. "Who are you? Which one? The billionaire CEO or the humble laborer? If you can't even be honest with yourself, how am I supposed to know?" The office fell silent. Beyond the glass, Atlanta sprawled in sunlight, but Danielle felt only winter's dark. She yanked the ring from her finger, slamming it onto his polished desk. The clink echoed like a final blow. "You lied every single day. I endured enough humiliation with the Whitmores. I won't be someone else's project. I am not a test for whether a billionaire can live like a commoner." Christopher lurched forward, desperate. "No, you're not a project, not a game. You're the reason I dared to be real. You'd think I was Ethan if I told you I was afraid. I couldn't lose you before showing you my love was true." Danielle locked eyes with him, her tears spilling freely. And now you've lost me anyway. She turned, striding out the glass door shut behind her, leaving Christopher frozen, gripping the ring tremblingly. Danielle drove home through blurred tears, each red light a battle not to sob aloud. Memories assaulted her, painting walls side by side, his steady hands in the hospital, the firelit proposal in the mountains. All of it soured, warped by betrayal and built on lies. The small apartment that once felt like a sanctuary now mocked her. The green walls she'd painted with him loomed as cruel reminders. She dropped her bag, collapsing onto the floor, head buried in her hands. Why is it always this way? Why does opening my heart always lead to betrayal? Her phone buzzed non-stop, Christopher calling. She stared at the screen, hand trembling, then hit decline. Messages poured in. I'm sorry. Please let me explain. Please don't leave me like this. She hurled the phone onto the bed, chest aching like it might split. The next day, headlines screamed his name. Photos of Christopher with politicians and business titans were plastered on every paper. At cafes, people whispered, some praising his generosity, others scoffing at publicity stunts. Danielle sat silent in the corner, feeling dragged into the spotlight, though no one knew her story. Monica slid into the seat across from her, voice soft. I saw the news. That's him, the man you were engaged to. Danielle bit her lip and nodded. You didn't know? Not a thing. Her voice broke, tears threatening. I thought this time was different, but it was just another lie. Monica's hand tightened on hers, eyes full of worry. You don't have to forgive him, but don't let anger destroy you. You still have your work, your life. Danielle clenched her fists. Her friend was right, but the wound was too raw, too deep. In the weeks that followed, Christopher came often to her building. Danielle never opened the door. Sometimes she glimpsed his shadow on the stairwell, sitting for hours in the cold. Each knock shredded her heart, but her mind screamed, don't repeat the past. One evening, she returned to find a box at her door. Inside was a notebook, sketches of buildings, scribbled notes, songs scrawled in his hand. On the last page, a message, everything I build, every melody I write, is for you. I don't know how else to show that this love was never false. Danielle closed the book, setting it on a shelf. She didn't throw it away but couldn't bear to open it again. She sat by the window late at night, watching the darkened street below. Rage and longing twisted inside her. She missed his arms, yet felt gutted by betrayal. Ethan had scorned her openly. Christopher had deceived her sweetly. Both left scars. She whispered into the dark, I don't need money. I don't need mansions. I just needed the truth. Why is that so hard? Outside, the winter wind howled through the frame, a cold answer. Inside, Danielle curled into herself, wondering if love still had a road back or if it was gone forever. 3 months had passed since Danielle left the ring on the glass desk of Hayes Global Tech. The city moved on as always. Buses stuck along Peachtree Street, fried catfish wafting from soul food joints on Edgewood Avenue, jazz sets echoing through dim-lit bars. But for Danielle, time felt frozen. Her cases filled the hours, but when night fell, emptiness pressed in. On her desk still lay the notebook Christopher had left. She hadn't opened it again, but couldn't throw it away either. It smoldered there like a hidden ember, a reminder that love wasn't dead, just buried under anger and betrayal. One afternoon, leaving court, Danielle spotted Ethan waiting outside. His suit was pressed, but his face looked worn, stripped of the arrogance she remembered. Danielle, he said softly. Her grip tightened on her purse as she tried to walk past. But Ethan added, I just wanted you to know. I'm in therapy now. I quit drinking. She stopped, startled. And what am I supposed to do with that information? Nothing. His eyes dropped. I just wanted you to know. I've changed. Losing you was the worst mistake of my life. But seeing you broken over another man, it hurts. Rage flared. What right do you have to say that? You treated me like a toy. You and your family humiliated me. Don't you dare pretend to care. Ethan's face twisted. He nodded. I know, but at least, I never pretended to be someone else. He did. His voice cracked. He lied to you from the start. Danielle turned away, but his words pierced deep. She hated that Ethan, of all people, was right. That night, she came home and flicked on the TV. Christopher's face filled the screen. Billionaire Hayes pledges new tech center for youth in West End. The anchor praised him as Atlanta's golden man. Danielle snapped the set off. Her chest tightened. Was this the same man who once knelt on her floor in paint-stained jeans, laughing after spilling a bucket of green across the boards? She pulled out the notebook, flipping through rough sketches and messy melodies, until she reached the last line. "Everything I build is for you." Her throat burned. Tears blurred the ink, but she shut it quickly, holding the book to her chest. He loved me truly, but he deceived me, truly too. Across town, on the top floor of Hayes Global, Christopher sat in silence before the glass wall, Atlanta glittering below. A full glass of whiskey sat untouched. The ring Danielle had left rested in his palm, cold against his skin. Meetings, contracts, glowing headlines, they all carried on. But inside, he was hollow. Success had never felt so much like ash. His assistant stepped in. "Sir, shall we announce you as the donor behind the Danielle Carter Foundation office?" Christopher shook his head. "No, she can't know. It's for the women she fights for, not me." He leaned back, eyes closed. Only one question echoed in the dark behind his lids. Will she ever forgive me? Or is it already too late? Danielle's small practice was invited to a community forum during Black History Month. She prepared a talk on women's and children's rights in divorce, a fight rooted in her own scars. When she took the podium, her gaze snagged on him, Christopher, in the back row. No tailored suit this time, just a plain shirt. But his presence thickened the air. Her breath caught before she forced herself into the speech. Her voice rang out, "We cannot let wealth decide who deserves justice." Too many times, women, especially women of color, are dismissed in court simply because they lack the economic privilege of their opponents. I've stood in that place. I know what it feels like to be treated as an outsider. Applause rose around her, but her pulse hammered, knowing his eyes hadn't left her once. Afterward, he approached. "You were incredible. You shouldn't be here," she replied, coldly. "I came for you, not for a stage." His voice was low, raw. He held out an envelope. "I started a legal aid fund in your name. It will give hundreds of women attorneys by their side. I don't expect forgiveness. I want you to know I believe in your dream." Inside, she saw the founding papers of a foundation seeded with staggering capital. Her chest clenched. "You think money can buy back trust? I don't need it. No, it's not to buy anything. It's the only way to show you my love was never false. Words aren't enough, only action." Her hands trembled on the papers. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part screamed this was pity, charity dressed as love. That night, Monica came by. Danielle told her everything, her voice breaking. "You still love him, don't you?" Monica asked gently. Danielle froze. Love, yes, it still burned, faint but fierce. But could love alone bridge the canyon carved by lies? Monica sighed. "You have to choose. Forgive, and risk again, or walk away, and live forever with that emptiness. No one can choose for you." Danielle looked out the window. The city glowed with lights, but inside her chest was a shadow. Meanwhile, in his tower, Christopher sat at his desk, writing a letter he would never send. "Danielle, I knew I was wrong from the beginning. I was afraid that if you saw who I was, you'd walk away. But in hiding the truth, I lost you anyway. Every day without you teaches me what regret really means. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only want you to know this love was never false. If you ever need me, even once, I will be there." He folded it, tucking it into the drawer beside the ring. Then he turned back to the window, staring at the city stretched below, bright, endless, and empty. April arrived, painting Atlanta in pale pink cherry blossoms. The streets glowed with spring, but it was still a long winter inside Danielle. Work at the legal office consumed her days, especially now that the fund in her name had begun operating. Women came for help, domestic abuse survivors, young mothers stripped of custody rights. Each face reminded her of Christopher, because she could not deny that he made this possible. One morning, She was invited to the opening of a new legal aid center on the south side. When she stepped onto the stage, her eyes caught the gleaming sign, Danielle Carter Legal Aid Center. Applause erupted, cameras flashed. Danielle smiled, but her chest was a storm. In the front row, Christopher sat quietly, not approaching. He only watched, his gaze heavy with hope. Danielle began her speech, her voice trembling at first, then steadying. There are battles we do not choose, but must walk through. I once believed I was alone. But today, seeing this center, I know my dream did not die. I hope everyone who walks through these doors will find justice and the belief that they are worthy of being heard. The room rose to its feet in applause. Christopher did too, pride and pain flickering together in his eyes. After the ceremony, when the crowd was gone, Danielle lingered in the freshly painted room. Footsteps behind her made her turn. Christopher stood at the doorway, holding a small box. "I'll leave if you want," his voice rasped. "I only came to give you this." Her heartbeat quickened. "I don't need more gifts." "It's not a gift." He opened the box. Inside lay a folded letter. "I wrote this months ago. I never sent it. Today, please read it. After that, if you want me gone, I'll go." Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The messy script held confession, apology, and the vow that his love was never false. Tears spotted the page. "You know, what I needed was never money, only truth." He stepped closer, eyes red. "I swear, from this day on, nothing but truth, no matter how hard. All I want is a chance to rebuild with you." Danielle drew a breath, looking around the room that would shelter hundreds of women. Then back at him, the man who had hurt her most deeply and was the only one who had ever made her feel like a queen. "You shattered my trust," she whispered, "but you also showed me how strong love can be. I'm scared, Chris, truly scared. So am I." His voice cracked. "But you deserve the truth, and if you'll let me, I want to face the fear with you." Silence. Sunlight slanted through the window. Danielle stepped forward, her hand brushing his. "We'll start again," she said, tears breaking into a smile. But this time no lies. His grip tightened, trembling. No lies. The weeks that followed reshaped Danielle's life. The center kept her busy, but she no longer carried the burden alone. Christopher was there, not imposing, not flaunting, just steady beside her. He drove her home on nights she was too exhausted to think, brought hot meals when she forgot to eat, or sat with her in the turquoise-painted office, reading files until their eyes blurred. She still had sleepless nights when the past whispered, "What if he lies again?" But Christopher was there each time she looked over, eyes clear, never hiding. He no longer made grand promises. He only said, "I'm here." And sometimes that was enough. On a Saturday, Monica hosted a gathering to celebrate the center's opening. Friends, colleagues, even some of Danielle's first clients filled the room with laughter. Danielle found herself smiling more than she had in months. Ethan appeared awkward and out of place, clutching a glass of water. When Danielle approached, he offered a sad smile. "I came to congratulate you. Whatever else, you deserve this." Danielle nodded. "No bitterness, no anger. Thank you, and I hope you keep your promise to change." Their eyes met past wounds, then closure. Ethan knew he had lost her forever, but for Danielle, it no longer hurt. From across the room, Christopher walked up. No jealousy, no claim, just a quiet hand slipping into hers. That touch told her she had chosen right. By summer, the legal center had become a lifeline. One afternoon, Danielle met Lucia Ramirez, the young mother who once fought a desperate custody battle. Now, thanks to the center, she won her case and held her children close. "Thank you," Lucia whispered, eyes wet. "You didn't just save me, you saved my kids." Danielle hugged her, a deep ache of purpose filling her. Behind her, Christopher watched in silence, pride warming his smile. He didn't step forward, letting Danielle shine in her own light. One evening, as the sun dipped, Christopher drove Danielle back to the little apartment they had once painted together. The walls were tidier now, but the same turquoise still glowed. He hesitated, then knelt, not in a tailored suit, not before cameras, but in their modest room. "Danielle Carter," his voice shook. I lost you once because of lies. This time, I hide nothing. I am Christopher Hayes, but I'm also just Chris, yours. I love you, not to prove anything to the world, but because you make me want to improve. Will you walk with me, this time with all truth? Danielle studied him long. Fear lingered, but alongside it faith, hope. She held out her hand, nodding softly. Yes, but remember, Chris, only truth. His laugh broke into tears. Only truth. Their wedding came in autumn, as Atlanta's streets turned gold. It wasn't lavish, just friends, colleagues, and women Danielle had once defended. Monica was a bridesmaid, while Lucia's 2 children carried the rings. When the minister asked, "Do you promise to love her and be truthful all your life?" Christopher looked into Danielle's eyes. "I do. With all my heart." Danielle smiled back. "I do. And this time, I believe." Applause thundered through the church. Ethan sat in the back, his face mixed with regret and release. His path would lead elsewhere, but at least he had learned something of love and truth. That night, in their small new home on the city's outskirts, Danielle sat by the window, her hand resting on her stomach where new life quietly stirred. She turned to Christopher, whispering, "I once thought I'd always stand outside happiness. But it turns out, all I needed was someone brave enough to love me with truth." Christopher drew her into his arms. Outside, the city lights shimmered, but the only light that mattered now came from the faith and love between them. This time, Danielle knew she would never fight alone again. She had reclaimed her crown not through wealth or power, but through forgiveness, the courage to love again, and a love stripped bare to its most actual core.